I'm Isabelle Gonthier, Chief Assessment Officer at PSI Services, and I invite you to delve deep into the world of testing with me. Every episode, I'll be on the virtual couch with experts from the testing industry, engaging in conversations about the latest developments in our field. Your quest for testing knowledge starts here. Well, welcome to the Tried and Tested podcast. And here today, I have the pleasure of being in Princeton, New Jersey, in the ETS offices. And I'm meeting with Amit Sevak. He's the CEO of ETS. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here to be able to have this conversation with you.
The same, Isabelle. It's great to be on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I love it that you call it a show. This is great. That's a great start.
Yeah, a show for testing nerds. How's that?
Oh, that's perfect. That kind of fits it 100%.
Isn't that what we are at the end of the day? This is going to be one of those kind of conversations.
Absolutely, it will be. It will be. Well, we always start the podcast with like the journey of the guest in terms of how did you get in the assessment industry? What's your story?
What's my origin story?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a prequel that'll come
Yes.
after the show to tell the origin story. I have always been interested in education. I come from grandparents who were both teachers. My younger brother's a teacher. My wife taught. So there's been a lot of education all around me, and my parents really instilled education. And so I early on decided to go into the sector and initially started in higher ed, and then did some work in K-12, did some work in the workforce space. So I've always been in and around education or education technology. And it was a couple of years ago that I really realized that one of the things that's really broken at a systemic level is how we measure people actually having that education, how we measure the way that they're getting trained. There's so much money that's going in. I mean, think about how much money gets spent across K-12, across higher ed, across workforce, and not just the US, but around the world. Trillions and trillions of dollars get spent, but we don't really know how well things are actually happening. I mean, are people learning it? Are they retaining it? Is there a return on investment for all of the work that schools and universities? So I started really thinking a lot about how do you measure education better? And that's what got me excited when the opportunity came to take on this role. And I said, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity to really change fundamentally how we think about the science of measurement for K-12, for higher ed, for workforce, because ETS has been such a unique organization at touching all three of those subsectors of our space. We do assessments in the K-12 space, in the higher ed space, of course, and in the world of work. And so for me, it just was one of the biggest honors of my life to take on this role to really address this question of how do you measure better.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important and interesting background because it starts with the foundations of education in a way, and now it's kind of like the measure of success.
That's right.
And there's so much going on in our industry right now that puts us in a position to question ourselves, like in terms of the value of testing in a way, which is really incredibly valuable. However, like it's always thinking about how do we do it and how do we kind of push it forward to continue to meet the objectives and, you know, in a way to always get better.
And education is often a laggard to other sectors. If you look at what's happening in banking or in pharmaceuticals or even in healthcare, there are so many analytics companies and metrics that are out there, even in sports. I mean, we know more about our favorite sports figures in terms of what are their statistics?
Yeah, their performance
Than I know about my child in school, or I know about what skills I'm developing as I go through work. Right? And so you kind of think about how these other sectors have either cracked the code or are starting to crack the code on measuring better to get better performance. So we can do this. I mean, we can do this.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're in a great position, and you're in a great position to do that. So I think it's a great segue in terms of like there's lots of changes happening, obviously in education and assessment. And I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more about your views on the future of assessment, really, in terms of what this could look like as we move forward.
Yeah. Where's the crystal ball, right? So we can like predict the future.
Yeah.
You know, the world of education is changing so quickly, and it was triggered partly by COVID, certainly by what's happened the last couple of years around AI, and also by just this appetite for change. People want better outcomes for their kids. We as workers want to upskill and reskill. Employers, governments, associations, everywhere you look, there's just this appetite now that I haven't seen before. And I've been in education for over 20 years. I am seeing just this desire for change. So I think a lot of what is allowing the change to happen is this moment that we're in right now. People really want to measure better. They want to see outcomes and impact more quickly and more effectively. And so I think that a lot of what's happening right now is providing the blueprint, the foundation for what we're going to see. So what are some of the big themes? One big theme is an increasing focus on transferable skills or durable skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are work-ready skills, right? So how do you assess the skills of tomorrow to help people get ready for the work of tomorrow? So that's a big theme for the future. Another big theme is the connectivity between what you're learning and the outcome that you're getting.
Yeah.
And so starting to really get that return on investment. Another one is credentials. The increasing importance of certifications, transcripts, licenses, in order to be able to validate the micro skill. And certainly everything, all of this is happening in a world in which AI is starting to really take shape in different ways. And we're implementing, as you know, AI in so many different ways at ETS, whether we're building an assessment, whether the research is happening, how do you develop ethical uses of AI, the research around that. So there's all of the AI pieces that are happening at the same time. So the specifics of what the future look like are still unknown. And what's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, let alone what's going to happen in 10, 15 years. But broadly speaking, the themes are around greater focus on measuring skills, greater focus on a return on investment, faster, cheaper, better, and certainly more and more use of technology, particularly AI-enabled technology, to help these assessments to become more effective.
Yeah, and I think there's an aspect as well in terms of continuous, like the continuity of it. There's been like the traditional approach has been very much like point-in-time assessment. And now we're sort of like really looking at expanding, leveraging the technology, leveraging different ways of thinking about assessments where it doesn't have to necessarily be linear. After a certain level of learnings, okay, now you need to get assessed. There's opportunities for assessments throughout. And I think it gets to that whole concept when we think about that lifelong learning. It's all about the learnings, being able to demonstrate what you've acquired and making it continuous as opposed to just chunks of time,
That's right.
point in time.
That's right. So much of our way of thinking about this is because of how our economies are structured. In a factory model or in a post-industrial model, you've got this expectation that you're learning at one stage of life and then you're earning later in life. The 4 and 40 you sometimes hear about. 4 years of high school and then you work, or 4 years of college and then you work. That model is really what you're bringing up, right?
Yeah.
It's not so linear anymore. It's not start here and end here and everybody is kind of in lockstep moving in the same direction. This is a much more dynamic economic environment. Where people can come in and out of learning experiences, people can come in and out of work experiences for personal reasons, for family reasons, for many reasons. People take time off and then they come back in. And I think that's what makes this an exciting time for those of us in the assessment space to think about, well, what are the kinds of ways to credential an individual or signal an individual skill set? And it's no longer just, what did I learn in high school? Get an exam, get a series of exams, get a transcript, boom, call it a day.
We're done.
That's it. I've been assessed, I know something, right? When you're 18 years old, or at university, whether you graduate in a traditional age of 21, 22, or later, that credential is also starting to get challenged. I mean, the world of higher ed. Why? That's because the world of work is having different expectations. I mean, more and more companies are not requiring a degree. More and more companies want to see much more transferable skills, communication, collaboration. The types of things that don't show up in a traditional credential are the kinds of things people want. So I think it's precisely because the economy is changing, and it's also because the education world is still trying to keep up, that there's an opportunity for assessments to suddenly play a critical role, to be a bridge at this critical time in which the world of work wants this, and education wants this. There's a Gallup survey I love that says, they asked leaders of companies, do you feel the educational system in your area is providing adequately prepared folks for the world of work. And the leaders of these companies said, probably about 10% of them said that, yes, the educational system is providing it. The same, when we asked education leaders, do you think you're preparing it? And 90% said yes. Yeah. And so there's just a fundamental disconnect right now. And that's where assessments, I think, can come in. They can help bridge what the world of work wants and the world of education wants, precisely because of this need for non-linear, non-traditional pathways to help people connect from education to work.
Yeah, it's bridging that gap and connecting the dots. I think you've said it well, is that there's a disconnect, and that's what we need to work on. And by looking at different ways of assessing, evaluating, and connecting, that could have been connecting those dots that right now are probably still a little fuzzy in a way.
Yeah, but this is where credentialing organizations like PSI come in, right? Because you can get licensed, you can get certified at different stages. You don't have to be in school or a recent graduate. You could be in your 20s, 30s, 40s, et cetera. By getting that extra credential, you're providing a signal to the economy that I have that skill set to be a pilot or a drone operator or a nurse's aide or a construction worker or an insurance broker, a real estate broker. All of those kinds of job opportunities get opened up at different stages. And so I love the certification and licensure space in our assessment sector, because it's really where we can help people where they're at.
Absolutely. And even then, from that perspective, it's also very much evolving, because again, it used to be also very much based on a one-point assessment and then yes, there's continuing education, people have to maintain their certification, but it's being revolutionized by other ways of thinking about, you're thinking about micro-credential, for instance. Instead of having like this big credential, you can have bite-sized approaches and you stack them up and then give them recognition along the way, which is also another important element to think about, which kind of shakes things up a little bit.
That's right.
And now a short break. Hello, tried and tested listeners and fellow testing enthusiasts. I'm Isabelle Gonthier, your guide through the fascinating world of credentialing. Each week, we dive deep with expert guests to explore the hottest topics in certification and licensure testing. If you're enjoying our journey through lifelong learning and innovation, take a moment to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you know someone passionate about testing or curious about the latest testing trends, why not share this podcast with them? It might just be the inspiration they need. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our community. Remember, sharing knowledge is one of the best ways to grow our industry together. Keep listening. When we talk about, I think that continuous education goes back to that concept of lifelong learning. So when we think about how relevant it is in today's world, can we talk a little bit about, yes, education, credentialing, but what does that mean to you? When you think about lifelong learning, what are the key elements that you would want to see? Because I know it's a concept and a principle that's really important to you from your perspective.
You know, lifelong learning is a concept that's starting to get steam. More and more people are talking about it. And there's always been this awareness, at least for the time I've been in education, that there's formal education and then there's informal. And the term lifelong learning has often been in this informal bucket. And I think it's starting to get steam because people are demanding more support there. Because we're living longer. So that's one of the drivers of lifelong learning. And people are working longer. And so when you're at a later stage of life, mid-career or later in your career, what kind of learning can I get to be able to be relevant for the world of work? And I think that's an example of what's driving this. The other thing that's driving this is really this awareness that things are becoming much more transparent in terms of skill set, particularly post-COVID. You can get someone from this geography or from that geography. And do they bring the skills that you need? And in this world that we're living in, where more and more people are working remotely or in a hybrid environment, being able to have those skill sets, being able to demonstrate those skill sets are becoming much more valuable. When you're living so far away from maybe where your boss is or where your other colleagues are, having those skills show up is going to become much more critical. So I think there's a lot of these elements that are driving it. In the United States, we also have, because our higher education system is a system that has lots of pressure points on there. I mean, we have, huge challenges with debt, the amount of student debt. We have huge challenges with the dropout rate, individuals that start but can't finish. We have 36 million people in the United States that have some college, no degree. And so when you think about all of the different subsegments that are out there, an individual that has high school but doesn't have college, or has college but doesn't quite have the job they want, or has had some success with the job that they want but now wants to change careers. There's so many segments out there in the economy. We have 170 million people working in the United States in different forms. How can we upskill? How can we reskill? And so these things are all driving it. So people living longer, people working longer, a fragmentation of needs, hybrid work, all of these are factors that are shaping this. And that's where I think assessments come in. I think the ability to assess an individual's skill set, where they're at, regardless of their background, breaking the ceilings that are often the ceilings that are requiring formal education. I think that's what people are wanting. That's what people are asking for. There's still a role for high school degrees and there's still a role for college degrees, but more and more, particularly Gen Y, but definitely Gen Z, I'm seeing this rapid shift towards recognizing credentials, certifications, and other ways to signal skills as starting to become more important. And that's why an increasing focus. We did a study recently at ETS called the Human Progress Report, and we found that across 17 countries and 17,000 respondents, 4 out of 5 people are describing themselves as lifelong learners. That's amazing. Just the self-identification.
It's innate. It's part of their themselves, who they are.
And maybe this is all the advertisement or social media out there about, live your full self, and you have more potential in you. Whatever it is, the opportunity exists for giving people more education, giving them more skills, giving them a better shot. And for people that didn't have these kinds of formal education opportunities, that weren't in a neighborhood where they could get to a great school, or weren't provided the kind of support at home. I mean, this is also a social opportunity for us as society to really provide new and innovative ways to give people education at different stages of life. So I'm really hopeful, I'm optimistic that with new technology, with the costs of delivering learning coming down through distributed learning, that we can deliver higher quality learning and really do it regardless of where the individual is in their stage of life.
Absolutely, and I think being able to recognize and highlight those skills that maybe in the past haven't been like as prominent in a way, but have always been important. But from an assessment standpoint, there was a lot of focus on academic, technical, and now like it's being able to recognize, assess, measure, and develop those durable transformation skills that are required to continue to evolve.
That's right.
In your career, in your life, from all aspects of it.
On that point, I mean, you think about K-12 education, you think about an elementary, middle, high school. We've got, in the assessment world, notions of summative assessments, summing up what you learned at the end of a particular school year or a particular level from elementary versus what did you learn in middle school, et cetera, summative assessments. And then, of course, there's been this shift over the last 2 decades to strengthening formative assessments, assessments that are embedded within the curriculum, to get an early indication of where a student is at while they're midstream, formative assessments versus summative. And then certainly there's these notions of intermediate assessments that connect the formative to this. All of these kinds of notions are really embedded into K-12. We talk a lot about educational assessments because that's where the world of assessments in the way we think about it in terms of learning and skills grew up. And then that translated over to the higher ed world. We've got assessments to help people get into higher ed. We have quizzes and other forms of formative assessments, and then you get your final exam that kind of sums up what you learned for the semester. So this language of intermediate assessments, summative assessments is baked into K-12. It's embedded formally and informally into higher ed. But then you graduate and you get into the world of work, and you're working in a company, you're working in an organization, or you're working for yourself. How do you structure that? You know you need stronger communication skills, or you want to strengthen a particular technical skill or develop AI literacy. We don't have structured pathways for working professionals or people that are aspiring to get into work to have that. How do we how do we reimagine assessments to support the lifelong learner? Because after you finish school, you still want to get a sense of how you're doing.
Yeah.
How do we get to a level of weekly feedback or monthly feedback or other kinds of things? I mean, one of the things I was excited at when we had the opportunity at ETS 2 years ago to introduce were quarterly checkpoints, OKRs, which is common in Silicon Valley and in other places.
Yeah.
So instead of just the annual review, we do a 90-day checkpoint. And I know others that have monthly checkpoints. And that's just an example in an organizational structure. But that's an element of an assessment. So the big point here is, how do you take that kind of infrastructure and even the approach of interim and summative assessments in K-12 and higher ed, how do we think about that in world of work? And that's a part of why I'm excited with this pivot that ETS is doing to build on our rich tradition in K-12 and higher ed, and in partnership with PSI to start to move into the world of work in a much more proactive way, because these are the kinds of science of measurement questions that can really change the world.
Absolutely, and then it's the evolution of it that is really critical. And I think it's kind of like gets us to talking about, from your perspective, that evolution. How does it need to look different? What are the innovations related to that? When you think about innovation in assessment, what comes to mind for you?
Gosh, there's so many.
I know, it's a tough question.
One term that our team uses a fair bit is multimodal. It's the ability to assess an individual across multiple forms or ways of engaging. So while somebody is completing a particular task or being assessed for something, you can assess multiple elements. If you think about a traditional test that's assessing one skill,
one at a time.
One at a time, right? But if you're in a multimodal environment, particularly when you have a screen, or you can capture the way someone's working off of a keyboard, or if they're giving a presentation, you can test not their body language, but also what they're saying, the content. That's what I mean by multimodal. And I think we're on the cusp of significantly expanding multimodal assessments to allow you to capture multiple data points of a particular skill set. And that can be for K-12, for higher ed, for world of work, a huge revolution that can give feedback to the individual. Because, so much of the question about assessments is, what is the assessment for? Who is the assessment helping? What's the purpose of the assessment? And I'd like to argue that a big, big part of the future of assessments is to actually help the individual know thyself, right? To know themselves a little bit more. It's like Fitbit, right? Or any of these other wearables. You get a lot of data, right? It's like, oh, I have 50 steps today and it's already 2 PM. Let me get off my chair and like walk around a little bit. I get data and then I can react to it, right? Giving people more choice, more agency, more sense of purpose. And I think that this discussion we're having is really on the cusp. So I think a lot of these innovations are going to be around integrating multiple assessments, multimodal. A lot of the other innovation, I think, is going to be actually happening in the shift from a traditional, more standardized test, if you will, to much more of a personalized assessment. And you think about medicine, right? The world of medicine is moving from, kind of everything in a standard way to much, much more personalized medicine, right? That's the talk of the town, as they say, much more personalized medicine. And education's moving that way. So a big, big arc around innovation is going to be, how do we help develop more diagnostics, more assessments, more interactive, and certainly adaptive assessments are going to be continuing to be important. We've already have a whole first, second generation of it, but the next wave of more adaptability in assessments is going to be key, and that's where the personalized learning, personalized assessments are going to come in. So it's an exciting time, and of course the use of AI in assessments is going to, there's so many ways that that can go.
It allows for that kind of like interaction to happen more seamlessly in a way, but it forces us to think differently about how we assess, because the traditional approach has been You get a score. It determines where you are at this point in time, and it gets you to a specific place. While now we really want to, from that lifelong learning standpoint, from a skill standpoint, we're looking at evolving that and leveraging and using those results and to be able to shape up where the person might go and to further develop their skill sets and evolve in their career or aspirations. So. Yeah. So AI, you've mentioned AI. We would be remiss not to talk about AI because it provides the opportunity to do exactly what we just said. When you think about it, though, in terms of the challenges and opportunities it creates from a fairness standpoint, because I think that there's been a lot of conversations around that in terms of, yes, it provides opportunities to give you feedback immediately, and it kind of generates a lot of like the adaptive aspects of it. But there's a lot of questions around the fairness. What are your thoughts there?
Well, gosh, there's the fairness is at the heart of assessments quality, and a big part of how we look at assessments is to have a very high standard for fairness. And so in the early days, we've been applying different elements of AI at ETS for decades now. I mean, really decades, because we have been testing where to use AI to help move the needle, but to constantly be concerned and making sure that when an assessment is provided, and if two different individuals are taking an assessment, that there's comparability in the outcomes of those assessments. So fairness to ensure that we're getting really good, high quality assessments is fundamental. So having a good assessment and having a fair assessment is essentially the same thing.
Yeah, it's one of the same, I would agree.
Yeah. And so I want to take a step back and talk about the fact that so much of what we are looking for is the ethical use of AI.
Yes.
And so Dr. Matt Johnson on our team at ETS recently published a paper that did a great survey of the ethical uses of AI. So I want to encourage all of those fellow listeners out there to really check out that paper. It's on the ETS website, and I think it can provide a really good grounding on all of the different dimensions that are out there around how do we really do this in a responsible and ethical way. Fairness also has to do with access to the education itself and the assessments, particularly AI-enabled assessments. So if you think about, if you go back 20 years plus ago, when the internet started coming into education, there were students that had access to the internet and those that didn't.
Yeah. There was some disparity there.
Yeah, and so that created a lack of fairness or a lack of equity in terms of the ability to leverage all the content that's out there and over time all of the educational tools that are out there that are on the web. It's the same issue right now, I believe, Isabelle. It's the same issue that there is a risk of a similar digital divide, almost like an AI divide, of those that can leverage particularly generative AI to pay for premium ChatGPT costs something.
And get more from it and leverage it. Yeah.
And so those students that have access to that versus those that don't, that creates a lack of fairness. So there's fairness at multiple levels. There's fairness in actually the integrity of the test. And then there's fairness in the use of AI. And what's happening right now is because there's so much use of generative AI in K-12 and higher ed to help support writing papers, to generate content, to even generate test questions, because teachers also, of course, use AI to help them be more productive in the classroom. And so constantly having that inner compass that's saying, is this fair? Is this right? Having that ethical lens to look at this is going to be so critical. So it's a multifaceted question of how do we ensure fairness and ethics in AI, and the use of AI in education and the use of it in assessments, and it's all interlinked. We had the opportunity at ETS this April to do a unique convening exactly on this question. And it raised more questions than it got answers, but it's also prompted a whole series of new convenings, new papers, new research around it. And so we believe this is one of ETS's key roles as a mission-driven organization to really elevate some of the mission-driven questions. And this is at the heart of it.
And this is so key to continue to evolve that conversation and to contribute to it. And I think ETS is doing a fabulous job doing that. So, we can talk for hours, Amit, and I think it's amazing, and there's lots of great elements that have been covered as part of this conversation. As we wrap up this conversation, what would be your final advice to our listeners, to the people in the industry, in terms of what to think about? As you know, it could be from a technology standpoint, it could be from where we're going. You know, what final thoughts from you?
Science matters. And science is simply to look at the evidence that backs up something that you're doing. And in the world of education, and particularly the world of educational assessments and workplace assessments, spending more time ensuring that the science is there to back it up.
Yes.
Because to rip out a list of questions and or to do an assessment, if it's not backed by actual science, there's not fairness, there's not necessarily ethics or integrity in it, and therefore it lacks substance. And so let's not confuse simply doing an assessment versus doing a high quality assessment that's backed by science.
100%.
A big part of our new approach at ETS is around advancing the science of measurement to power human progress. We think about ETS as an education and talent solutions organization that's really doubling down on the science. We're investing more in our research, more in our technology, more in our platforms. And in partnership with our colleagues at PSI, we want to really take it to the next level in the world of work as well. So I would say rigor matters, science matters. Listen to your psychometricians.
Absolutely, every time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, in a nutshell, science is everything in our space.
Yeah, well, you're speaking my language, and that is amazing and very, very important. I think it's an important note to connect to our audience and remind people of the importance. A lot of things are happening fast and quick, but the science, the rigor remains the most fundamental principle. So thank you, Amit, for your time. Appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thank you, Isabelle. This was great.
Thank you.